Hi there, this is Mr. Mortensen, and I would very much like to talk to you about the use of Levi Strauss's binary oppositions theory and how it can be applied to the short film For the Birds to understand how that narrative works. So this is the first shot of the film. It's in fact Pixar, the name of the studio, famous studio that made this and many other movies. Now I'm just going to pause it here and explain a little bit about Levi Strauss. He had an idea that most narratives are basically made up, or all narratives are made up of binary oppositions between two opposing forces. And he was less interested really in how narratives were put together in terms of the order of events. He was more interested in the deeper or underlying themes that came out of the clashing together of these binary opposites, stuff like heroic qualities versus anti-heroic qualities like cowardice, or good versus evil, male, female, etc. So according to Levi Strauss, binary oppositions reveal the structure of media texts. And he also had an idea that it's important to look at the denotative meaning, which is the surface meaning, and the connotative meaning, which is the sort of secondary or symbolic meaning of the stuff that you see in front of you and hear during the course of the narrative. So, how does this apply to For the Birds? Let's have a look. Here we've got the start of the movie, and a small bird, and yet another small bird coming and sitting on a line. So as we can see, we have by now a large group of fairly small birds, and they're all bickering. At the moment, there doesn't seem to be much in terms of binary oppositions. They all seem to be as bad as each other. Okay, so we just had a good example of the good old shot reverse shot technique, showing a relationship between two characters, and that is what introduces the binary opposition in this movie. So we've got in frame here a big bird and a series of small birds. So that is the sort of surface level binary opposition in this movie. And the rest of the narrative is all about seeing how this opposition is going to resolve itself, how this conflict is going to resolve itself. So we as an audience are interested in seeing, well, what's going to happen between the interaction between these two birds. That's where the drama comes from. And here we've got kind of a further complication. Now, there is another level of meaning to this binary opposition, and that is that the opposition of the small birds and the big birds actually represents an opposition in terms of values. As we saw at the start of the movie, the little birds were all bickering and arguing amongst each other, whereas the big bird was basically just trying to be friendly. And so you have a visual and a kind of a personality clash of opposites to make it easier to follow. I guess the target audience is small children. Okay, now at the moment our sympathies are being swayed more towards the big bird because he is showing the values of friendship. He's not retaliating. He is even seeming to be playing along with his own persecution at this point. The little birds, on the other hand, are showing malice and evil and values that probably an audience wouldn't really hold dear. And so it's quite satisfying when this binary opposition here works out in favour of the big bird. So he seems to be getting rewarded at the end with the resolution in the narrative by having a good old chuckle at these nude little birds. So that's how the binary opposition works, just in terms of the narrative and how it positions the audience to sympathise with the good values. However, there are also wider implications to this. I've already hinted at one. One is the target audience, which in this case is children, and so the narrative itself is presenting two sets of values, and basically one triumphs and the other set of values, the picking on those who are different, doesn't triumph. So it's kind of a didactic or a teaching kind of story. And there are also another, you can peel back another layer of wider implication with Levi Strauss here, and that the film can be read as an opposition between the studio Pixar and all of the other, not only all of the other animated studios, but even all of the other major studios. So Pixar during the late 90s and the whole decade of the 2000s was by far the most dominant studio in terms of profits. And you have Pixar being symbolized by the big bird and all of the other little squabbling birds symbolizing all of the other studios that are trying to kind of knock Pixar off their perch. So that's another wider implication, and as we can see, the result is that Pixar comes out on top and the other little birds kind of have to hide behind him at the end. So there's several wider implications to this narrative theory.